I'd like to welcome our final speaker for this morning, Diana Taylor, who will echo a number of the themes that have come up already in talking about research meeting reality.
Thank you so much, Ray. And you guys, I hate following you. That was fascinating. So I'll keep this brief. Anyway, I'm Diana Taylor. It's great to be here speaking with you. I also am a graduate of the Columbia Business School. And one of my professors while I was here was Ray Horton, who started this program here. So thank you, Ray, for pointing me in this direction. As you may know, I have the privilege of serving as the board chair of Accion, which is an international NGO focused on microfinance. Accion got its start in 1961, 50 years ago, in Venezuela as a community self-help organization. And we've been involved in providing microloans and related financial services to the poor since 1973. In our 50 years history, we have helped build 62 microfinance institutions in 31 countries on 4 continents. Today, those MFIs serve in round numbers more than 4 million clients. We have also worked in the United States for about 20 years, and I'm proud to say that we're the largest micro-lending network in the country by quite a bit. We've made 20,000 loans, loaned out about $120 million, and we have a 90% repayment rate. And the interest rate is anywhere from about 8 to 15% here. Anyway, with few exceptions, almost all of our global focus is concentrating on delivering financial services in urban settings. So I think it's safe to say that our work stands squarely at the intersection of research and reality. After 50 years of trial and error and experimentation, we have some knowledge about what works, what doesn't work, and what we might do next to fulfill the promise of full financial inclusion. According to the latest World Bank numbers, the number of extreme poor actually decreased between 2005 and 2008. That's the last year that these numbers are available, in every region in the developing world. This is really significant because there are a lot more people now than there were then. And that's good news. This reduction was the first that the World Bank had ever seen over a 3-year monitoring cycle. But that still meant that by the end of 2008, 2.47 billion individuals, 43% of the people in the world, were trying to exist on less than $2 a day. And let us remember that that is an average of $2 a day, or $730 a year, which means $1 today, no dollars for the next week, then $15, then no dollars for a few days, then $3. You try living on that, feeding, housing, and clothing your family, let alone yourself, especially when you have no access to savings, credit, or insurance products. Our challenge is urgent. For the first time in history, more than half of the world's people live in cities. Over 90% of urban growth is occurring in the developing world, adding an estimated 70 million new residents to urban areas each year. During the next 2 decades, the urban population of the world's 2 poorest regions, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, is expected to double. As you would expect, as world population shifts to cities, poverty is increasing more rapidly in urban areas than in rural ones. According to some estimates, by 2050, 2.6 billion people, twice the size of today's China, will live in cities struggling to meet basic human needs. In their migration to cities, the poor are willing to relinquish their own fabric of social support in exchange for the many risks of urban poverty: poor nutrition, insecurity, isolation, disempowerment, and low-quality or non-existent public services. To those challenges must be added insecure and inadequate housing, unhygienic living conditions, ineffective governments, limited availability of municipal financing, and lack of formal employment, to name just a few. While these challenges are hardly unknown in rural settings, they can frequently be far less acute than in urban ones. At least in rural settings, the air is probably a little cleaner, you probably have access to a well or a stream, and you might have a little land where you can grow vegetables or keep a goat. And yet people continue to come, all for the opportunity of work, for jobs and regular income. if not in the formal economy, then in the informal one. Because even though urbanization increasingly concentrates poverty, it also provides more possibilities for escaping it. It's where the jobs are. And did you know that in Bolivia, where I was recently, where Accion works with its partner Banco Sol, no less than 95% of the current population of the country is employed in the informal sector. We've talked today about the various definitions and measurements of poverty. Let me suggest a definition that adds 2 more dimensions and informs our work at Accion. The first is vulnerability, meaning that the poor have few or no safeguards in place to protect them from catastrophic events. Months of prudent savings can disappear in a single day through an accident, illness, or theft. And second, it's often forgotten that low-income people can be and strive to be agents of their own progress. For human dignity and social justice to flourish, individuals need to have a hand in their personal development as opposed to having development done to them or for them. I'm speaking about self-help. Financial services have a critical role to play here. Microfinance organizations today focus their work on expanding access to financial services because financial services, while they help address all the dimensions of poverty, are especially focused on mitigating risk and fostering self-help. In fact, very interestingly, there was an article in The Economist last month about the World Bank and its new leader, Jim Young Kim. The article starts by saying that over the last decade, there have been 2 big trends which are reshaping world development. The first is that the funding sources have diversified away from the developed economies like the U.S. and Western Europe to middle-income countries and flows of private capital through NGOs and foundations. The other is a new way of thinking about development, which focuses less on national plans and big infrastructure projects and more on the rights of individuals and specific groups. This trend has the added advantage that less money seems to end up in Swiss bank accounts. The more directly money goes to the end user, the fewer opportunities there are for corruption. Financial services have a critical role to play here, as we are concentrating more on individuals. Microfinance organizations focus their work on expanding access to financial services because financial services, while they help address the dimensions of poverty, are especially focused on mitigating risk and fostering self-help. So let me be clear. Concerted efforts to provide health care, education, basic infrastructure, a growing economy, and other components are all absolutely critical to helping to eradicate poverty. No one working in financial inclusion claims that microfinance and related financial services are the answer. Rather, these services assist people in taking advantage of what society has to offer, allowing individuals to make their own contributions to their economic growth. Financial services permit the poor to manage their economic lives more smoothly. For example, by allowing them to move money from distant relatives efficiently and safely, by smoothing consumption, by buying inventory for a micro business on favorable terms when the opportunity arises. Financial services allow the entrepreneurial poor to build a better life by investing in productive assets such as tools and premises to expand a business, sending children to school, financing purchases such as a refrigerator or a car that improve the quality of life. One thing we have found, and a lot of you know a lot more about this than I do, is that it is really hard to prove through research, data and analysis and studies that microfinance works. There are so many other factors in the equation. How do you isolate the impact on a person and their family or their community of a loan? How do you adjust for factors such as health, drive, luck, weather? People like Jonathan Morduck and Dean Carlin have done a lot of work on this, as have you guys. So what is the reality? So I'm going to tell you a story. I was in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. It's hard to pronounce. Recently, and I went to visit some clients. There was the hairdresser who had just added on to a store and increased his business. There was the baker who had bought an oven. There was the seamstress who had bought 5 sewing machines and was employing her husband and several neighbors. But one case stood out specifically. A woman called Maria, who had a business making dolls out of felt. She was on her 3rd loan from us. It was $500. I asked her if her life had changed as a result of this loan. And she said, oh, yes. And I asked her how. She said she was earning, before the loan, she was earning about $10 a week. After she took out the loan, she started earning $20 per day. Said, how did this happen? And her daughter was also attending college. And she said that before, she would borrow money from a moneylender, the loan shark down the street. She'd go to the market, and she had enough money to buy enough felt to work on that day and sell over the next day or so. So she'd make, $1 or $2. After she got the loan, she could go to the market and she could buy 3 weeks worth of felt. She could work on the dolls with an assistant, and they could sell the dolls. So basically what this loan had allowed her to do was operate her life a lot more efficiently. Instead of spending half a day every day in the market buying felt, she spent half a day every 3 weeks. So she'd basically bought herself a week and a half of time. Financial services help not just the entrepreneurial poor, but non-entrepreneurs as well. Not everyone is cut out to run a business. There's a rule of thumb in microfinance that says every microloan impacts not only the borrower, but also 4 others as well: a spouse, a child, a parent, an employee. Financial services also help protect against loss or crisis. Savings accounts and microinsurance help avoid the risk of theft or loss that comes with carrying or storing cash, and can help pay for medical care and emergencies or rebuild after a natural disaster. Financial services address these dimensions of poverty, and when used for these purposes, can reduce both vulnerability and risk. The mission of microfinance organizations like Accion is to help provide the broadest segment of the low-income population with access to a full range of financial products and services, beginning with basic savings and credit, but also including remittances, insurance, housing loans, and more. Farsighted organizations maintain a philosophy of respect for clients that also drives their concern for the quality of those services, which should be affordable, convenient, transparent, and tailored to the client's needs. Last fall, the Microcredit Summit reported that microfinance services now reach over 200 million clients worldwide. This is impressive given the short history of the industry, and such a milestone is a good moment to take stock of how we're doing and what we've learned. When we're trying to decide what I was going to talk about today, Dr. Fisman requested some reflection on the ways that the microfinance industry is assessing and refining its model, how new ideas are actually put into practice. So thanks to industry developments over the last 2 years, we sit precisely at the intersection that I mentioned earlier, taking account of new data and making adjustments based on compelling feedback. As you probably know, there's been a lot of soul-searching among microfinance experts, triggered by the Andhra Pradesh crisis in India in late 2010, and similar issues in Morocco, Nicaragua, and Bosnia, among other countries. Over the last few years, hard questions have been raised about industry practices and the efficacy of our work. We've seen crises of over-indebtedness, allegations of harsh collection practices, suicides, concerns over high interest rates and fees, and skepticism about the very impact of microfinance. These issues are further compounded by the entrance of new players who may have different, less mission-driven motives from those of the original pioneer NGOs. If these are generally the right concerns, then the appropriate responses would most sensibly lie in 3 essential areas: strong consumer protection, meaningful transparency, and the development of industry standards to measure social impact. Over the last few months, a group of 8 CEOs from various global microfinance networks, including Michael Schlein of Accion, has been working together to fashion an agenda that leverages the good work of 3 key industry initiatives. These 3 initiatives represent an unprecedented effort by the industry to improve the quality and breadth of the financial services we provide, putting clients and their needs ahead of any differences. The group is trying to lead by example and raise the standards of their own networks. In so doing, they may provide some critical mass and coordination to what until now have been very disparate efforts. The first issue, strong consumer protection. Based on the notion that microfinance should first do no harm, the SMART campaign, represents an industry-wide consumer protection effort. Its 7 client protection principles incorporate such core ethical principles, business practices, as fair treatment of customers, privacy of data, and responsible and transparent pricing. And the campaign is working to ensure that these principles become embedded in the very fabric of MFIs around the world. I'm very proud to say that the SMART campaign was launched by Accion's Center for Financial Inclusion, which is a Washington-based organization whose director, Beth Rhine, likes to describe it not as a think tank, but as a do tank. The CFI is a collaborative effort to advance the commercial model of microfinance while upholding the interests and needs of poor clients worldwide. It works with a wide variety of actors, microfinance experts, banks, investors, regulators, technology providers, firms, universities, and others, to address the challenges related to financial inclusion. Through the center, Accion serves as the SMART Campaign Secretariat, and I'm pleased to tell you that since the campaign's launch in 2008, it has experienced remarkable uptake. Today, it boasts endorsements by more than 2,700 individuals and organizations representing 130 countries. Nearly 900 of these organizations are microfinance organizations, serving no less than 40 million clients. It's grown with such speed because it builds on the social commitment that prompted the funding of microfinance institutions themselves, a commitment that continues to serve as a guiding value for much of the microfinance community. The second issue, greater need for transparency. So Microfinance Transparency, which is a not-for-profit founded by Chuck Waterfield in 2008 to accurately measure and report on the pricing of microfinance loan products, provides a forum for MFIs to transmit their pricing information to all interested stakeholders, including practitioners, investors, and clients. In less than 4 years, Microfinance Transparency has had a significant impact on the way the industry perceives fair and transparent information. It is now active in 26 countries with voluntary data provided by more than 400 microfinance institutions. Over time, widespread transparency will put pressure on all players to compete and reduce rates. The third issue, we need an industry standard to measure social performance. The Social Performance Task Force, based in Washington, D.C., holds the prospect of giving us common tools to measure our impact. It took decades to develop tools like ROE, ROA, and ROI, which we all use today to measure financial impact. We need to be patient yet persistent as we develop equally powerful tools to measure social impact. So let me talk for a second about the issue of impact. After all, it was the work of Dean Carlin and that of MIT's Poverty Action Lab, both here with us today, that challenged the dominant narrative of microfinance. Their randomized control trials forced practitioners, and especially the media, to re-examine the claims for what microfinance could do. It was a wake-up call, and the industry is responding. I believe that the 3 initiatives that I've just outlined are a strong start. I agree with CGAP said recently about this whole subject, that expectations for microcredit in the popular discourse have been overblown. CGAP wrote, "Far from a panacea against poverty, some argued that microcredit was actually doing harm." And then they added that the evidence supports neither extreme view. But they also pointed out that the industry has focused almost exclusively on the rhetoric of entrepreneurship and overlooked or downplayed the many benefits of microcredit, using loans to accelerate consumption, smooth earnings, absorb shocks, get that one step ahead, using and making household investments, including education for children. I agree with that too. In its attempt to attract philanthropy to fund its work, the message of microfinance as a poverty alleviation tool got oversimplified and overhyped. Nuance and complexity got lost in the communication. Microfinance is just one tool in the toolkit of international development, although it's an important one to be sure. I would not chair Accion's board if I did not believe that. When Accion looks at the social impact of microfinance today, we find ourselves agreeing with David Rubin's assessment. He says in his new book called Due Diligence, which I highly recommend, that while the success of microfinance is real, its strength lies not so much in lifting people out of poverty. Industrialization and jobs do that much better. Nor does its strength necessarily lie in empowering women, although it does. It lies instead in leveraging modest subsidies to build financial institutions and industries that give millions of poor families more control over their finances and how they live their lives. That institution building has led to a rich body of knowledge about how to lend to the world's low-income people. It has developed supporting frameworks like regulatory regimes in many countries for specialized institutions serving the poor, and transparency standards that allow investors to identify investment-worthy microfinance institutions and incentivize sound governance and responsible operation. And it has created an organizational framework that genuinely marries both social and financial objectives. By combining the best elements of charities and businesses, microfinance institutions take on a distinctive and different character. For-profit companies with strong social orientations are something to celebrate and to look to as an agent of future positive change in society. So are nonprofits with business-like finances and delivery. Through its success at institution building, microfinance has constructed platforms with enormous potential to provide socially valuable services to low-income people the world over. In the 3.5 decades, as I said, those services have reached 200 million people worldwide. We have a long way to go. Another 2.5 billion of the world's poor still lack access to any financial products other than those provided by loan sharks. But I think you will agree with me that it's a pretty good start, and that if we remain flexible and nimble, listen carefully to the feedback, and respond appropriately, we will ensure that microfinance delivers on its full potential, and that we will build a world that is truly financially inclusive. Thank you.
No one wants to be that person who's standing between an audience and their lunch, their feeding time. So I certainly am not going to take a full 15 minutes to go back over everything that's been said this morning. But I do think there is one point that is worth reiterating, emphasizing, that relates to a number of themes that have come up through this morning. I want to go back to something that Linda Gibbs said early on. And in fact, the whole theme of her comments was on the importance of failure. And on the importance of experimentation. And we've heard a lot about experimental approaches throughout the morning. Sundal had that very evocative image. He had many evocative images, but one of the evocative images was of the bullseye that's rarely hit. But I think one thing to keep in mind with that is that when you hit the bullseye, in some ways it's very different in the social enterprise space versus the for-profit world, in the sense that when you hit that bullseye, there is immense value and ability to replicate and scale those things that are amenable to replication and scaling. So in the for-profit world, imitation is your enemy, whereas in the social enterprise space, it truly is the deepest form of flattery, and it's what allows us to truly change the world rather than just some smaller community. And that really is what makes this theme of experimentation and failure resonate that much more. So I'd encourage you to take these words to heart. And I recognize, and something that I was waiting someone to ask Linda Gibbs, was how is the city of New York going to help me feel better about failing in my organization so everyone else can benefit from my failures, but I bear the cost? So I do think that's a big and open question. In closing, I do want to thank the many, many people who made this morning possible and run so smoothly, the least of whom is the one who's standing between you and your lunch at the moment. We'd first of all like to thank our partners in this who, now we just see empty blue, Robin Hood and the Illumination Fund. Our partners at Robin Hood, Susie Epstein and David Weinstein, have been immensely helpful in piecing together the program and the group of attendees. And of course, the Illumination Fund, Lori Tisch and Rick Luftglass, were extremely grateful to them for their support. Also, my forte has never been organizational matters. So any organizational competence behind this morning, you can chalk up to one of the following three: Beth Mitchell, Carolyn Tharp, or Saiba Anand, who did a fantastic job with the organization. Of course, we thank the speakers all for taking time out of their days to come to impart these new and innovative ideas to us. And finally, we are extremely grateful to all of you for coming to participate. Saiba is telling me that I should talk for longer. Is that right? But I cannot do so. So thank you all. It sounds like it still may be a few minutes before lunch actually makes it to the serving platters. But thanks again for joining us. I look forward to continuing the conversation.